My name is Leslie Jakeman.
My name is Marilyn Shaw.
My name is Susan Garner.
In 2005, after a 5-year battle with drugs, my son Matthew lost his life, aged 20.
And my son is Marcus Shaw. I say is because he is and always will be, but Marcus died on the 8th of November in 2002 as a result of a heroin overdose following a few years' struggle trying to overcome addiction.
Unfortunately, I lost my son to a heroin overdose in February 2001.
As a child, Marcus was a loving, kind, compassionate, fun-loving, risk-taking boy, but he was never any trouble. After 14, we noticed a change in him. He became moody, withdrawn, rebellious and aggressive towards his younger sister. We couldn't understand this and we went to see if there was a problem at his school, only to be told that he was a typical teenager and would come through it. We had words with Marcus and he said he would try and behave a lot better. It was only when a friend said to me that she noticed he didn't look well that my fears, it had been in the back of my mind that there was a bigger problem than that. Marcus had found a new group of friends through a school friend and I rang his mother to ask what they were like, to be told we've stopped our son seeing them because they're taking drugs. As soon as I heard this, I went and found Marcus and said to him, I know what you're doing, Marcus, you're coming home and that's the end of it. Marcus said, I'm so glad you found out, Mum, because I was getting afraid. We grounded Marcus for that summer. He didn't do well with his exams. He stayed with us and came down to work with us. We have a transport company and he worked in the yard. At the end of the summer holidays, he decided not to go back to do a sixth form. He wanted to go to a local college, which was arranged and he went. Unfortunately, not very long after going to the college, he again encountered drugs and started using again. This was the beginning of a nightmare for the family. Having a drug user in the house and trying to live a normal life was hardly possible. Marcus refused to come on holiday with us and we were afraid of what would happen to him if we left him behind. And so from then on we had separate holidays. We soon discovered that he was on to the drugs and we tried everything we could. We went to the GPs and we were referred to various places. And over the next few years we tried one and after another and he would fall back. He tried detoxing, he tried going to rehabs. Through various sources we eventually found out a rehab called REMAR. And they were based all over the world, but there was one in Switzerland. And we thought that was the best and safest place for Marcus to go. Marcus agreed to this, and so we bought a one-way ticket for Marcus to go to Switzerland. He was met in Geneva, and for one whole year, Marcus was there in Switzerland on a rehab course where he had to go completely and utterly without drugs. He had to go without any cigarettes, without any extra money, and eventually overcame using the drugs and enjoyed it and was very happy there. Unfortunately, it closed down in Switzerland and he was sent to Frankfurt, which he did not like and did not get on with. He asked to come home. I said, you need to stay longer. Marcus said, I want to come home, Mum. You can trust me. I will be fine now. And I said, no. Marcus then proceeded to go to Frankfurt Consulate, where they rang us and said, we have Marcus here, Mrs. Shaw, can you help him get home? And so he came home after a year. And he was clean and it was wonderful. Marcus got an offer for Leeds University, which he was delighted about, but unfortunately he fell off the wagon again. He found it extremely difficult, not for want of trying, but because when you're addicted it is very hard. And so we were going through the whole scenario. As I say, it's the whole family that suffer. Marcus came in the end and said, can you help me, Mum? I want to go to this clinic in Harrogate where I can be clinically detoxed as I cannot face going cold turkey again. Of course, we were delighted to do anything to help him. Marcus came home, cleansed of the drugs, with a prescription for 12 months of naltrexone. This I administered every morning, crushed on a spoon under his tongue to make sure he took it. That was the only way I could feel safe that he could not use other drugs whilst he was taking this. During that last year of his life, he was very open about what it was like. And he said to me, "Do you know what it feels like to be an addict, Mum?" And I said, "No, I don't, darling." He said, "It's like having a little crab in your head that is constantly agitating. It never goes away, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. With all my heart and soul, Mum, I wish I had never smoked that first spliff." At the end of the year, he was frightened of coming off the drug, and I said, "Shall we get another prescription?" He said, "No, Mum, I can do it. Trust me, I'll be fine this time." Unfortunately, he couldn't. And coming home from Wales one day, he'd been in touch with his old school friend and was going there for the night. I begged him not to, but he was always loyal to his friends and he went. Unfortunately, after meeting this friend, he didn't come home. And when we eventually found him and brought him home, it was evident that he had been spaced out and was not fit to work or do anything. I put him to bed that night and searched his room to see if there was any more evidence of drugs. I couldn't find any. The following morning, he came into our bedroom and said, "Don't be cross with me, Mum." I said, "I'm not. We'll start again, Marcus." That morning, he decided to take a bath, whereas it was usually a shower. He went into the bathroom and we heard the taps running a long time. We tried to ask him if he was there. There was no response. And with the help of a neighbour who is a doctor, my husband and he broke the door down and went into Marcus. We'd phoned the ambulance, they came, and I went with him to hospital. I was sitting with him in the ambulance when they were saying his vital signs are dropping. When we got there, they were resuscitating him. I was in the next room praying so hard. They put Marcus into an induced coma, and for a week I sat by his bedside and held his hand. I told him I loved him. I hope he heard. At the end of the week, the machine had to be stopped because there was no sign of life that Marcus could sustain. And so my son died on the 8th of November, 2002, aged 22.
My son Luke, he was born and bred in Harrogate. He was a lovely young man. He was much loved by me and the rest of the family. Did very well. He wasn't particularly academic, but he was extremely artistic. And he was very happy. Luke suddenly started going around with a different group of friends. This group of friends lived near us on a fairly biggish estate in the Harrogate area. And they weren't particularly nice people. I'm assuming, I don't know for a fact, but there must have been some drug use because Luke started smoking cannabis at this time. He became very difficult to communicate with. He'd go out, he wouldn't come back when he was supposed to come back, and I didn't really know where he was from time to time. We spoke about it and things seemed to go from worse to worse. I got called into the school and the school were very concerned about Luke. The school believed that Luke may have been bullied by this group of friends. I know that Luke did talk to me and did say that he was frightened of a group of friends in our area. And perhaps it was that he decided to go round with his group of friends. He would then feel protected. But either way, he started using cannabis. We decided, we spoke about it and talked about it. I did go to my doctors and took Luke to the doctors, and he went to see Harrogate Against Drugs and Alcohol to see if there was any support for him there. We sold our house, decided we'd move to a different area in Harrogate. This seemed to work for a short while. He met up with a really nice friend and they were getting on very well. But sadly, Luke was still using cannabis and things were not improving. Things went from bad to worse. He was in terrible problems at school. He was in terrible problems at home. I didn't know where he was half the time. He'd go out, not come back. By the time he was 16, he'd be out all night. Luke decided he was going to leave school and he got a job. My brother took him to the job centre. Luke got a job straight away and went to work for a picture framing company. He seemed to really like it. The boss from the company, it was only a small company, used to pick him up, take him to work and then bring him back. But unfortunately, when Luke got his paycheck, he blew all the money on cannabis and possibly other substances. I wasn't really too sure exactly what he was taking. I asked Luke, why does he have to go around with friends that smoke cannabis? And Luke said to me, all my friends smoke cannabis. It's very difficult to find anybody who doesn't smoke cannabis, Mum, because most people are using. Things just progressed and went from bad to worse. Like I say, I spoke to the police, I spoke to social services. Nobody seemed to have any answers. After a great ordeal and Luke becoming quite a bit aggressive at home and lots of arguments, staying out all night, me being concerned about him, I knew that something had to change. So Luke and I spoke about him going to college. He decided he didn't want to go to college in Harrogate because he had so many friends in the area. He decided he would go to Bradford. His dad lived in the Bradford area, and I thought this was a positive move because it got him away from Harrogate and from his so-called friends. I sold my house to be able to support Luke. I moved in with my dad. Luke went to Bradford College. I supported him for a short while, and then I just kept in touch with him and tried to make sure he was okay. My plan was to then buy another house, a small house, because everything had been such a struggle financially for me, as well as all the emotional upset. When he got to Bradford, he did fairly well for a short while, but not for very long. He soon came across a different group of friends, and it went from bad to worse. He was using more drugs, but I rather suspect he was using much stronger drugs in the Bradford area. He only attended the college for a short while. He got kicked off the college campus, and then he became virtually homeless. I said to him, why did you change friends? Why did you move and go around with a different group of friends? He said, I don't know, Mum. I just was going around with a gang of lads who I was a bit frightened of, and I decided I would change my friend. I got fed up with being good all the time. I thought life was boring. He said to me, I wish I had never changed my group of friends, but now that I have come this far, I cannot go back. A charity organisation supported Luke for a short while, put him into a bedsit, and Luke stayed there for getting up to about a year. I kept in touch with him, going through and seeing him. I could never give him any money because I wasn't sure what he would spend the money on. So I used to go through to Bradford and buy him some food and maybe pay 1 or 2 bills for him where he was getting into a bit of bother. He was only about 18, 17 at the time, and it was difficult for a young man. And I just said to Luke, he wasn't very happy at all. It was going from bad to worse. I said, look, do you want to come back to Harrogate? But you have to have a job. You have to support yourself. So he agreed he would do this. Luke came back to Harrogate. Hallelujah. For the first 5 months of Luke being back in Harrogate, things were absolutely wonderful. He was much improved. He went to work, enjoyed working, no problems whatsoever. And then all of a sudden, Luke moved into one of his older so-called friends and unfortunately started using again. Things did go really right downhill now. Luke got kicked out of his bedsit and was virtually homeless yet again. The next thing that I knew was I'd been out, was living with my partner. I'd been out and I got a phone call from Harrogate Hospital. My son had overdosed on heroin and nearly died. This is the first I knew of him being involved with heroin. So I went to see him at the hospital. Luke was crying, I was crying. It was very traumatic and very upsetting. All I knew was that I had to have my son back at home living with me, and we'd try again and try and get some support. So I split up from my then partner. I went to live in a house with Luke. We spoke to the GP and Luke got referred to the Harrogate Addictions team. Sadly, 2 weeks later, I got another phone call from the hospital. He'd overdosed again. I couldn't believe that he'd done it in such a short period of time. And I just could not believe this. I thought, my son is going to die. I tried to talk to people at the hospital. There was hardly any support. But he was working. He did have a job. I drove him to work, brought him home every day. 2 weeks after that, I went to pick Luke up from work. He wasn't there. I was very, very worried about him all night. Where is he? What's he up to? Has he used any drugs? I didn't know where he was. I couldn't get in touch with him. The following day, I had no choice. I just had to go to work. And I work in a big office with lots of people. This lady came up to me and got hold of me by the hand, led me out of a big office into a private office. She didn't have to say anything to me. I knew my son had died. He had overdosed on heroin. Luke's funeral was on the same day as the appointment for the addictions team that the doctor made for him, 3 weeks after he died. After all of this, of course, we had an inquest, and the ultimate thing is that Luke had died from taking £10 worth of heroin. That's £10 in money. He'd met up with another friend. You don't really know who they're going round with. You don't know their circle of friends. At the inquest, it turned out that he'd shared this heroin for £10. So to cost Luke £5 in money for his life. I tried to talk to Luke on several occasions. He wished dearly he hadn't gone round with this group of friends. He wished he'd stayed and tried hard at school, but once he decided to break away and go round with this different group of friends, he didn't think there was any way back. Luke was the light of my life. He's my only child. I don't have any other children. A big family, lots of support, which I'm very grateful for. But I've lost my only child and the most important thing in my life.
Matthew was a bright, loving, happy boy who was very artistic. He was very close to me and his father, my late husband, and his elder brother. We lived happily in a small country village. At the age of 11, Matthew lost his father, my late husband, to cancer. Then, at the age of 14, Matthew's elder brother, left to go away to university, and that left Matthew with a huge gap in his life. And how was he to fill it? The answer for him was cannabis. A group of boys at his school, he was in his final year, were smoking cannabis on the fields of the school. And Matthew was drawn in. He looked up to them, as young people do with peer groups. And from then on, he was hooked. Cannabis is addictive, even though so-called experts may say it isn't. It is. And he was well and truly hooked before too long. At first, I thought the changes in him were purely down to adolescence changes, but I was wrong. He became lethargic, less interested in school, less interested in everything, basically. He became aggressive, unpleasant, difficult. One day, he came to me and said, "I've been caught by the police in possession of cannabis." I was shocked. Together we tried to get through this. He promised me that he wouldn't touch any more of it and that he would try his best to stay away from those boys. However, it wasn't possible. He was hooked. Eventually he took his exams, his GCSEs, and fortunately he managed to get 10 good grades. And then it was the holidays for him, and that gave him an excuse to use cannabis. He was using it daily. He had no interests, no hobbies anymore, just smoking cannabis. He began college where cannabis was readily available on the campus, and the problem continued. He quickly lost interest in college, and he was soon needing support from both the college and myself, and they gave him a chance to try harder to get back on track. However, he didn't achieve the first year of college and he dropped out. Meanwhile, I had decided it would be a good idea to get him away from the peer group, and so that's what we did. And we found a house together near a new college in the city of York. He began at the new college when we were in the new house, and within a short time he was having the same problems, difficulty in keeping deadlines, not attending lectures and lessons, and smoking lots of cannabis. He was very well and truly hooked and becoming more and more lethargic, more and more withdrawn, more and more difficult to live with. He became aggressive. He was stealing from me, both money and items. I said, enough is enough. Tough love. You've got to find somewhere else to live. We found him a place to live temporarily, and for the next 2 years he lived intermittently in one place or another, all rough. I kept in touch. I gave him food and clothing. If I ever gave him money, he would use it, I expect, for more drugs, so I stopped giving him money. One freezing December night in 2004, I had a call from Matthew. He sounded very tired. He said that he had used heroin, so I knew he was coming down from it. I asked him if he would like some help. He said, I am ready, and so I collected him. I found him on a platform at York Station that night, and I took him home and we talked. He slept, and it was good again to have him with me. I knew of a charity called Remar which could help him immediately, and he said yes, he was willing to do that. And so he slept the night, and the next day I contacted them and they said bring him over to us. And so the next day I took him to one in Manchester and handed him over to some people who said it would be about 18 months before he could be well again. So I said okay, and he said okay, and then we parted. It was a very emotional parting. He was 19, 6 feet tall, but he was still my baby, and I was handing him over to strangers and in the hope that they could help him at last. But we both knew it was his best chance for help. He spent 5 months there, and in that 5 months he worked very hard with them, and he achieved good health and mental stability and gained confidence. He became more himself again, and I was very happy. He turned up on the door one day and said he wanted to try again, and so that's what he did. He got a job. He decided to save money for a new bike, which is what he'd always wanted, and he stayed with me for 2 months. However, just turned 20, he decided he'd like to live on his own, so he'd found a room to share in a house with 2 older men. He decided to give it a go, and I couldn't object because he was 20 and I didn't want to overrule this. He had to make his own decisions. But it wasn't far away, and we kept in touch. He called in regularly. We had meals together, we watched television together, and we had happy times. One Friday evening he came home just to catch up with me and to say could we arrange for him to use the internet because he'd saved enough money for his new bike. And I said yes, that would be good. And we arranged for him to come again over the weekend, and then we parted with big hugs and said I love you to each other, and he climbed on his bike and cycled off waving and smiling to me. That was the last time I saw my son. That evening he went back to the house and he decided to join one of his housemates, the eldest of them, in having a drink. They drank a little bit of wine and a little bit of alcohol, and then later in the evening they used heroin. The next morning my son was found by the other man, but it was too late. My son had passed away. Sometime later I found my son's diaries, and I'm going to read an excerpt from one of them. Drugs in all forms are dangerous. I, Matthew, vow never again to touch drugs, and to not even have a sip of alcohol until the day when I am sober and working and can have a pint with a friend like normal people. Also, I vow to make my Father proud by redeeming myself in whatever way I can to the people I have hurt. I'm sorry. Please, God, give me this chance. My son lost his life to drugs. His chance was taken away. Please remember that you have a choice, you have a chance to not take the same path as my son did. Thank you for listening.